Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you had good lunch. Lunch break. I know it was short, and I'm terribly again. I continue to say I'm sorry until the end of the day. My God, I'm so sorry. But um, here we are, and now we're gonna have a very nice interaction regarding social media and KOLs, DOLs, MSLs, a lot of L's. So I would love to introduce the two speakers that will be joining this session. First, we have Nayanika Banerjee. She's the Senior Manager, Client Solutions and Strategy for H1. And we also have Alyssa Weissman. She's a medical science liaison for Leo Pharma. So thank you and welcome so much, Alyssa, Nayanika. Great to have you. And we do have some polling questions, so I'll be releasing those in a moment just for you guys to be aware. And then they'll be going over those results. So thank you both for being here with us so much. Welcome, and please take it away.
Hi, everybody. So thank you so much for joining us. I will give a little quick intro, although thank you, Jonathan, for giving our intro. Again, my name is Alyssa Weissman. I'm an MSL with Leo Pharma, and I'm the digital lead for our MSL group. So I'm really excited to give this talk here with Nyanika, and I'll let her introduce herself as well.
Sure, thanks, Alyssa. Hi, everyone. My name is Nayanika. It is not the easiest name to pronounce, but thank you all for joining. I'm really excited for our chat today. As Jonathan mentioned, I work with H1. For those of you who haven't heard of us, we're essentially, connecting HCP information, scientific clinical research information, all in one place. And I work on the strategy and solutions team. So I typically work with global med affairs, clinical MSLs, regional directors, and all sorts of folks at big pharma and biotech companies to help, really analyze the data, use the platform, and support KOL strategy. And very often that includes DOLs. That's like a hot topic. So I'm really excited to talk about that. And just a little detail about me is actually was in compliance prior to H1 and the med strategy work I'm doing now. And I think it's a good fit to sort of today's discussion because it's not only about identifying and engaging with KOLs and DOLs, right, in an effective manner, but also in a compliant manner. So I look forward to kind of weaving that into today's discussion and chatting with Alyssa.
Great. So I guess we are waiting for some of our poll results to come in, but while we do that, let's get started, Nyanika.
Yeah, sure. So while we wait for the first polling question, Alyssa, I just thought, I think first of all, you bring such an interesting perspective as an MSL yourself, right? So maybe if you can speak to a little bit about how you're operationalizing, right, social media in a compliant manner in the field and during your interactions.
Sure, thank you. So one thing that I think is so critical, and it's almost like the easiest answer is the answer. As an MSL, you do not have time to score Twitter for your KOLs or even LinkedIn. And even if you do, I guess, have that time, there's so much out there. So the first thing that you should do is take a look at your company policies, read them in depth, because each workplace will have their own set of rules and regulations. Some will tell you you shouldn't be liking posts from KOLs or DOLs. Some will say you shouldn't be commenting as a company policy, right? And perhaps those are things that you can consider if your company doesn't have those policies, speaking to your manager, speaking with your leadership to start to get some of those written down, because it's so critical as an MSL to know, that what I'm doing is within company policy, is within compliance. These are gray areas and it's new and like you said, a hot topic. So that to me is the first step. Once you take a look at your policy, if you're not sure, if you have any questions, you need to ask. Because again, there's so much gray area in this digital space, and everything that you do on the internet, as we know, is recorded, is visible, is out there. So that before you do anything, really, really make sure you understand those policies. And the next thing is, find out what your company is doing, who they are partnered with. Companies like H1, and we'll speak a bit about some of the capabilities, have various services and solutions to help teams be compliant and also efficient with what they're doing. So it looks like we do have some results here. So our question was, do you have an MSL specific KOL, DOL strategy at your company? 33.3% said yes, and 66.7% said no. What do you think about that, Nyanika?
Yeah, it's funny because I love what you said, right? Like, I think coming from compliance, I used to work with pharma to actually help build a lot of these, policies, because very often it's very common. So I'm not surprised by the no. And given that this is not just any policy, but around DOLs, right? And I always like to say this, like, it was funny. I was in the field, much like all of us, right, prior to COVID, and pharma was anyway kind of getting there and heading towards this, but COVID really accelerated, right? How quickly we had to kind of adapt and really, really go digital in every way. And to your point, I think very often, because it's so gray, it's very important, right, to ask and clarify. And if you don't have policies, kind of nudge your managers and they will take it up, right, to build a policy if they don't have one, because it is becoming more and more crucial. And there are so many risks, and not just risks, even from a strategy perspective, right? Having some clarity, and I'll speak to some of this in a bit when we talk more about like metrics and how you can actually build a DOL strategy, right? Because it becomes very important to quantify some of this in addition to just having a more qualitative, hey, I know Dr. X and I know he's great and, he's on Twitter, so let's just do it, versus, how you actually proving, that, he should be a part of your DOL strategy. So things like that. Yeah, exciting.
So I agree with you, and I really like what you said about nudging your manager along, and they will do it. They will. This is definitely an area where there's so much noise, and it is a hot topic. But our KOLs are on. They're out there. They're on social media. They are doing this, and if we are not, at least listening to what they're saying in that space, I think we're missing out.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, we have our next, on the topic of metrics, our next poll question. What kind of digital metrics are you looking at? So we had 21% say follower count, 43% say reach, and 14% social platform engagement, and then 21% other. How do you think that we could use digital metrics and a data-driven approach, to identify and establish these KOLs?
Yeah. I think this is so interesting, and it's one of my favorite things to work on, because most of our clients come to us for this, right? Because as you said, the number one, I would say, concern issue is there's so much out there, right? And the Twitterverse and the internet as a whole. So how can you make it more data-driven, more quantifiable, right? And I'm just looking at the results here, and it's interesting to me because, reach is something we used to. It's a very common metric, right? Just a measure of, what is their following versus how much they're tweeting, for example, just as a gauge of how many people they're able to reach. But very often what we see is that enough? Is knowing that enough to say that this is someone whose opinion we care about? Is that person truly a digital opinion leader, or just someone who's digitally very active, right? So that's why I like to talk about this data-driven approach, because what that really means is, when you're trying to, again, not only engage compliantly but effectively, you really need to know what are the metrics, and you need to define them, right? And a part of it, because I come from sort of an engineering background, I personally am very data driven. So I say this about everything. I feel like every strategy thing, almost anything, should have certain quantifiable metrics, but how can you apply it to this digital realm, right? So just as an example, I think one thing I say is step one is identifying what those metrics are based on what you're trying to do. Right. So I'll give you an example. For if you're looking to say, you've had, new set of results, you're trying to educate and, share that amongst your KOL universe. I think the first goal is not just looking at digital as one unit, right? But finding the people you care about, your say top KOLs, and then say your top publishers, your top researchers, and then seeing the overlap of, hey, are they on Twitter? Are they also digital opinion leaders versus just going very broad, right? And scraping everything. Because that's where I've seen my clients as well just struggle and get a little bit lost because you don't really, especially as a very targeted medical, strategy sort of population, right? I feel like we should really care about people whose opinions matter, right? And they should qualify not only as digital people, but digital opinion leaders, very truly. So similarly, if you're looking for, say, Congress, right, you're planning or you're looking to engage around that, not just looking at people who are tweeting about, say, you're an onco team, ASCO, ESMO, versus people who are actually oncologists, right, who are talking about relevant discussions and relevant topics happening at these congresses. So that's what I often mean by metrics and sort of data-driven approach, is identifying those metrics, looking at the overlap, right, and connecting the dots versus kind of just going very broad or scraping, right, the whole universe. Another good example I always say, just when you're, again, talking strategy and just data-driven approach, right, when you're trying to identify people who'd work with you, right? We often use terms like earn and own content, right? So say you want to find people who are going to work with you, help you build your digital strategy. I think finding people who have more own content, meaning they're putting out, right, more stuff digitally, versus if you're trying to just spread the word, again, say new results or get the opinion, etc., then I guess you should be going for people who have more own content, right? Meaning people who are mentioning and talking about them, because that's likely to spread the word more. So the key message here, I guess, is that identify your metrics based on, your overall goal. So having a clear vision of what you're trying to achieve, identifying metrics to quantify them, and then kind of, identify DOLs accordingly.
I love what you said about, first thinking about your strategy. First step, what are you trying to achieve by engaging with these DOLs, KOLs? That is so critical. And if you don't have that in place, I think you can find yourself, lost in the noise, even using various solutions. If you don't know why you're doing it or what it's going to give to you,
Yep.
There is so much and it can be overwhelming. And as an MSL, you can only be so many places at one time. And, physically or even virtually meeting with folks, you can only be on the phone with so many people at one time. And, the time that you do have to pre-plan for your calls or research your KOLs, you want to spend that time efficiently. And you don't want to get sucked into, Twitter conversations back and forth amongst these KOLs, so I think that's so critical. Our next poll question, which social media platform is the most useful? Looks like close to a 50-50 split, 50% Twitter, 44% LinkedIn, and then 6% other. Gosh, I wonder what the other is.
Yeah, I know I've heard from clients like YouTube comes up, Instagram comes up these days. I always say it, but there's so much noise. I mean, we've tried. That's actually one interesting question I wanted to maybe get to in the end if we have time. But talking about these platforms, the other thing we've seen is very often they replicate. Like they're usually copy pasting. So I like that I'm seeing Twitter at 50%, because that's also what I've seen, is that typically Twitter, LinkedIn, right, are where you're basically capturing most of it. So
right, I'll see some of my KOLs will tweet and then post that tweet to LinkedIn, right? So yeah, and
exactly,
probably there are some that are on even TikTok these days and others. So so go ahead.
On this note, Alyssa, I just want to ask you, would you try to talk to a little bit about how you can engage with these KOLs who have a digital presence in a meaningful way, right? And again, of course, while being compliant. So what are some ways in which you can do that?
That's a great question. And I think that's really what's on the minds of our MSL teams. So I think what's so critical as an MSL is that active listening, and you can practice those skills even on the internet, right? Even on social media. So, you know, taking a look at what your KOLs are putting out there, what is important to them, what are they tweeting, what earned content are they posting, right? Who are they posting for? What are they speaking about? When you see that KOL, when you meet with them, when you reach out to them to establish a relationship, I do think there is value in saying, oh, I saw your tweetorial on such and such topic. I thought it was extremely interesting. Or I saw, that you were tweeting about this Congress that's coming up. I will be there. I would love to connect with you. So using this as a tool to see what's important to your KOLs and DOLs, and leveraging that when you meet with them, when you reach out to them as a conversation opener. When you think about how we engage with our top KOLs, they're so busy, they have such limited time, and you want to bring value to them. You also want to connect with them in a professional way. And I think that this is an opportunity to do so in a meaningful way. Like we said before, follow your company policy. I would really be hesitant to comment on anything, right? So whatever your company policy says, you should follow that. But if they do allow for you to comment, I would, use your best professional judgment, but I would be very hesitant to do so. Like we talked about, everything online is out there. It's there. It's, permanent, and it can be found and seen. And, so that's one place where I would urge some caution. Again, follow your company policies, but if they're a bit less stringent, I would just think about that. And also think about what you're posting publicly to social media as a person. Your private life is your private life, but when you put it on social media, it is quite public.
Yep, everything is public these days. I feel it's just so it's funny. Like, I never used to Google myself as much, but lately it's something I heard in one of the trainings, and then I was like, so it's nice to Google yourself sometimes these days too, because you want to know what your digital footprint looks like, because there's someone looking just like we're looking at folks up all the time. So yeah. Someone says people say Instagram is very popular. Yes, there are so many of these influencers, and I mean medical influencers these days as well, and they have a huge following. So yes, Instagram is definitely becoming more and more relevant. From a data perspective, we definitely struggle, like really again cutting through the noise, because it's hard, particularly for Instagram, just because it's used in general also, versus LinkedIn and Twitter, which is still a little more relevant conversations. But yeah, definitely Instagram is everywhere.
Yeah, in derm, Instagram and TikTok are very popular amongst the derm, from Dr. Pimple Popper and everything else. It's very popular.
I follow some, myself. So derm is actually, I think, one of the biggest, I would say, in the Instagram space, right? Yeah.
We also
that's also.
Oh, go ahead.
Very good. I just think it's also interesting how different sort of TAs, right, and disease states would differ, right, based on the digital, media.
There's a question, I think, for Nayanika. In your experience, how much time do these policies take to be created and then used?
Interesting. I would say to be created, nice to actually create some of these for my client in my previous job as a compliance consultant. Creation doesn't take a lot of time, right? If you're hiring, partnering with the right experts, there's pretty much, especially certain countries, I feel like even the US, right, where, social sort of patient interactions, the kind of information you can share directly to patient consumers has also been a little more stringent versus other countries. Either way, if you're partnering with the right experts, I feel like policies can be created relatively quickly, and I want to say within like a few months, versus I think implementation is what we would always not struggle with, but I think that's what takes time, right? Just really making and in compliance, at least I used to always use it, and everyone in my past company would, we call a culture, right? Can you create a culture for compliance? And I feel like that's still so relevant. And yes, it's an umbrella term. I always say like culture, it really depends on how you're using it. But to me, when I say culture for compliance, what Alyssa was saying, just making sure compliance isn't just having these strict rules and scaring people in a way that, hey, if you're not doing this, you're going to be penalized, versus being more like, hey, if you're not sure, ask, right? And policies are really meant to give them that guidance. So I want to say, if you're training sufficiently, if your training programs are in place, even implementation shouldn't take more than 4, 5, 6 months. So I want to say within a year, and most of our compliance programs, the implementation timelines as well, they can be phased out, right? So if it's just a digital policy, I want to say within a quarter or two, you should be able to train effectively and start seeing and integrating those into your processes. So a year, I would say, give or take, should be a good enough timeline. So
yeah,
that
and
answers the question.
what you said around culture and training, those elements are so critical. If you feel in your workplace, safe to ask questions, that will take you so far. So you can read the policy, and if it's not clear and you don't feel safe to ask questions, that culture, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. And I really agree with that. And training as well. And also having things be, easy to use, easy to bring into the fold of what you're already doing, and having them be value add for the teams, making the MSL's life easier if you're adding an additional system, an additional login, for example, making those things be integrated into your CRM or whatever you're already using. Just to keep things as simplified and streamlined as possible for the end user, because if it's not easy to use, we may not use it.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it's fun. It's because I think tech burden is something I personally always talk about. Like, I feel like there's so much out there, and that's one reason I personally, not a plug-in, but platforms like H1, but even otherwise, other platforms, I think just platforms or databases which connect a bunch of different things and also make it easy to use. Right. I think, and those things, in addition to platforms which also allow you to integrate controls, right? Because what you spoke about, not just building those policies, making it easy, giving your MSLs the right resources, right? Be it a quick hotline or a pop-up which is integrated into the database or something, right? If you're not sure, can you just flag it or ping, like a message related to that quickly? So things like that, I agree. Like, I feel like tech burden is such a, relevant thing today, especially in this industry, but even otherwise, that it's so important to make it easy for folks, because otherwise it's just counterproductive, adding another policy, adding another thing to do. So, yeah. I also see the last polling question. What is the most common issue or difficulty you face with regards to your digital KOL strategy? And it's interesting. I see outreach has 41.2%, noise has 11.8%, security concerns has 5.9%. It's interesting because I feel like pharma is starting to get a hold of the security stuff, which initially was like a big, concern, but we're getting there. We've got a handle on that. And then tracking being 17.6%, and then others being 23.5%. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think would be, some ways to address some of these common issues or difficulties? I don't know if you want to speak to perhaps the noise, or thinking about efficiency, or even outreach.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, outreach is an interesting one. So I'll get to that. I'll start with noise because, again, I feel like that's number one. That's the one thing I hear a lot from clients, and it's totally relevant. But outreach is I would say, the second one. So, in my opinion, so it's interesting to see that come up at 41.2. So I'll start with noise. So, yeah, as we spoke about, right, there's so much out there. How do you cut through it? So, step one, I feel like I kind of spoke about, right, finding the right platforms, finding the right metrics. First off, identifying the right digital opinion leaders, right, based on all that I spoke about, having those metrics aligning with your strategy. But then step two, I think, is once you have an idea of who they are, really looking at it in a very cross-functional approach, right, and connecting the dots. And again, goes back to finding platforms which don't just look at these data points, right, separately, but really holistically. And what I mean by that, and I'll give you an example, right, say, even on H1s, but even otherwise, when you're looking at, say, a DOL, not just seeing one data point, right? All right, are they on LinkedIn? Great, yes, they are. But can we connect that to, hey, what was their last publication around whatever, breast cancer, right? Are they also talking about breast cancer on LinkedIn? Are they also on Twitter? So say I already see in one platform, in one place, all right, this person's on LinkedIn and Twitter, more likely to be a DOL versus someone who's just on LinkedIn, probably hasn't updated anything in a while, right? So just these are, I think, good indicators of cutting through the noise. And then the other thing I always say is, and I think one of my clients actually mentioned this on a call once, and it really stuck with me, is looking at a person's digital footprint and profile beyond just the virtual, right? Because all these people are actually real people, real KOLs, real HCPs. So and I feel like we face this in our personal lives too, right? Everyone has this virtual image and this virtual footprint, which is great. It's a great starting point for us, especially when we're talking digital strategy. But you have to take it a step ahead, right? And that's where I think the outreach bit comes into play and really goes hand in hand because, all right, based on your data, your digital footprint, I know you're relevant, right? You're digitally active, you could play a role. But be it one outreach or meeting them once, or if you know them, just, looking at them as a whole sort of real human being and seeing, do they really, align with your company values, with your medical strategy? And can they take it forward? Not just through this one tweet, but in a more, integrated manner with your company and your culture and your strategy. So I think that's an important thing. So I would say the big takeaway here, first of all, talk about noise, is, finding platforms without platforms, either way, not just looking at one, but really connecting and looking at it in a cross-functional manner and looking beyond, right? And then the other thing around outreach, what I would say, and this one's interesting, again, going back to my field experience, a lot of these KOLs, right, they're just, as humans, they have characteristics, and you can kind of gauge some of that digitally. But if you have a personal connection, even better. I think identifying who has the appetite, right, for the kind of digital outreach your company or you're willing to do, right? Like I've seen some HCPs straight up, they just hate the whole idea. They had to do it during COVID, but they're not about it. You mention, a digital whatever journal, and they're like, oh no, just give me the printed ones. So I think gauging those and factoring that in, and I think Alyssa spoke to some of this, right? When you're planning engagements, when you're looking at these HCPs as a true, partner versus just a data point, I think gauging these characteristics and preferences really adds value, right? And really makes them realize that, hey, this person actually truly cares about me, isn't just pushing something. This person's actually researched me. So I think that's one thing about outreach, which is really, making it more about them. Are you open to it? Step one, after you've identified them, and then kind of tailoring it. Maybe they're not open to it, right? So, and very often the other thing I see, and this often plays into digital strategy, comparing it to your KOL strategy, is a lot of these DOLs are relatively younger, up and coming rising stars. So having and tailoring your strategy based on who you're speaking to. Most of your tier one traditional, ivory tower KOLs, they might not be. Some of them are. There are some. They're very few. They're like super prolific. They've really adopted the digital trend, which is great. You can totally identify them. They're few, as we all know. But those, rising stars, they might be your tier threes, tier fours. But again, From a KOL strategy perspective, maybe you're engaging with them as a tier 3, tier 4 at that level. But as from a DOL perspective, maybe they should be treated differently and higher up, right? And how that plays in as well is, I think, an interesting consideration when we speak about outreach.
Yeah, I really agree with everything you said. And I think it's so critical to think about our KOLs as people and holistically, right, when it comes to who they are as well as our strategy. I think we're coming up on time, and I just wanted to just give a quick disclaimer that all of these views are my own and are not representative of Leo Pharma. I wanted to make sure I got that in before we finished.
Likewise for me too, absolutely my own. But yeah, this was such a great chat. And I loved, again, I said it in the beginning, I feel like Alyssa's point of view, right, as an MSL, and mine, which has mostly been sort of as an outside consultant working with multiple companies. I just feel like this is such an interesting exchange of perspectives. And I also love the polling questions and the results. It's given me a lot to think about. So this was fun.
Yes, and thank you, Nayanika. I really appreciated your background in compliance as well as in developing systems and solutions. I think, Jonathan did a good job of pairing us together.
Couldn't agree more. This was so fun.
Thank you both. And I do have a question. And you mentioned, Alyssa, that sometimes, and we need to be very careful of your own personal, right? One thing is to, hey, okay, I'm using, because I guess when you're trying to recruit or check or what a KOL is doing, you're doing that from your personal Twitter, right? So for example, if you like the Vikings, like I do, I cannot say stupid Packers, blah, blah, blah. And then like 2 tweets later, like, hi, like sharing something, like, how do you handle that social interaction when we are a persona, not just a professional, right? But you need to keep it a professional way. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm just curious on how to handle correctly your social media.
It's a good question, and I think it's a very timely, modern question. A lot of us in my age group, the millennial crew, we grew up at the same time as the internet grew up, and things have really changed so significantly from even 5 years ago, even 10 years ago. It's a whole new landscape. I think LinkedIn typically is your professional social media. That's your professional face. And I do see folks posting on LinkedIn about all sorts of other things, which, that is their choice. And but if you're following your KOLs and DOLs on there and you're posting things, they could see it. It could potentially, it could be a sports rivalry or it could be something deeper. I would just be cautious. And when you're putting your best professional foot forward, you should be doing that in every way, in person, online, via phone, via email, when you're leaving the parking lot of that doctor's office, the way that you drive. I live in Philadelphia in the Northeast, the way some folks drive, it could be offensive. So you have to think about it as a professional. I would probably think about either creating a professional Twitter that you use just to follow. Perhaps you're not really posting. There are plenty of solutions, perhaps Nayanika could speak to, that actually pull in this information without you having to have your own account.
Yep. Yeah, good point, Alyssa, actually. Yes, I think platforms, H1 does, and I think even others, as I said, finding platforms which have all of this in one place reduces a lot of these risks in a compliant manner, right? There are firewalls, you don't have to use your personal IDs, but B, if you even had to, this is something that's worked for me, is what Alyssa was saying, really keeping it separate, right? I personally like to keep, even based on the platform, it's very clear certain platforms are catered to, they're they're meant, right? They're used for certain things. So, for example, LinkedIn, I tend to keep it very professional versus Instagram, which is more personal. And then you accordingly engage and post, right? So I couldn't agree more. It's very important to keep it separate because, as you said, everything's out there, everyone's seeing. So it's very, very important to be careful of that.
Thank you. And just wanted to mention that when you were talking about Googling yourself, and I wrote this in the chat, I was like, was I the only one who opened Google really quick and said, what is that? Because you don't normally do that.
Right?
Some people laughed at me, but it's crazy. I mean, the social media, and again, it's in like you guys were saying, it's very delicate nowadays because everything stays, and this like your private life is public the moment you hit enter or click or etc. and release or I mean, pretending that that doesn't exist or it's not there is not right. And so it's I think it's a double-edged sword when it comes to professional interaction, right? Because you need to like you guys were saying, even in the way you drive. Wow, that's I'll pay more attention now that I'm coming to Philadelphia to see the way people drive. I'm curious about but sounds like it's kind of fun. And really, thank you both so much for your time. This has been an incredible interactive session that has like I think it's a very hot topic, and it will continue to be a hot topic of conversation. How do you handle these social media interactions with HCPs and KOLs and DOLs, and now more breed or as they continue to emerge? So thank you, Alyssa. Thank you, Nayanika, for your time. Thank you so much. And speaking about social media, I'm not if maybe applies, but we do have a leaderboard in our platform, and I just wanted to. I mean, there are 4 guys that are really took to the next level. This is amazing. I mean, we have Akshay with almost 23,000 points. That's bananas. And then you have Sandeep with 22-1, and then Carlos has 21-4, and then Anthony has 19-4. My goodness gracious, you guys are the embodiment of what should engagement look like in a virtual conference. So keep it going. We're not done yet, but I don't know. It's been the wow that those numbers, and thank you everyone because everyone has been super engaging and super active throughout the day. I'll just use 2 minutes we have for quick announcements. I do that all the time. I'm sorry. Remember to rate the sessions, to rate the speakers. I'm pretty sure Alyssa and Nayanika would love to know how they were received.
Yeah.
So we'll send the feedback to them. And every session right after lunch is available on demand, so you can go ahead and watch it. If the presentations are allowed to share, they will be there as well. So thank you, Nayanika and Alyssa, for joining me here for this. What else? Oh, again, make the most out of the experience. Visit the sponsor booth. If you want to know more about H1, please go ahead and click. And thank you so much. Now let's get ready for the next session. So I'll play the funky music, which is pretty cool.
Thanks,
Love
everyone.
the music. Thank you, Alyssa.
Thank you.
Nayanika.
Bye.